An American news anchor was detained yesterday in Venezuela along with his team. Univision's Jorge Ramos was interviewing President Nicolas Maduro at his palace in Caracas when Maduro objected to a question about a video showing his own citizens eating out of a garbage truck. Here's Ramos on what happened next.
They confiscated all the cameras, they confiscated the videos, they confiscated the interview, they took away our cell phones. I don't have a cell phone. And they stole my work. My job is to ask questions, and he stole our jobs. And he thinks that he can censor international press the same way he censors people in Venezuela, but he cannot do that. We won't be silent. This is an abuse.
Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence visited Colombia to meet with opposition leader Juan Guaido. The vice president urged Venezuela's military to abandon their support for President Maduro. The UN Security Council is set to meet about the crisis in Venezuela later today. And joining me now is CBS News national security reporter Olivia Gazis. Olivia, let us talk about what is unfolding. Vice President Pence said that all options are still on the table, but he didn't immediately support military force. What is the U.S. doing instead to address the crisis in the near term?
That's right, Anne-Marie. Pence was dispatched to Colombia for this whirlwind trip yesterday as it looked increasingly like the humanitarian aid delivery of last weekend was developing into something of a combustible situation. So we saw it, in fact, did. His presence yesterday was intended to reinforce this message that the U.S. is standing resolutely behind interim President Juan Guaido. And he was also there to roll out these incremental but still meaningful next steps to increase the pressure on the embattled leader in Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. So what he did yesterday, Pence announced a new set of sanctions on officials within the Maduro regime. He said he offered more diplomatic aid to the region, and he said that partners there in Latin America would need to step up diplomatic pressure on the countries there to buckle down both diplomatically and economically in order to isolate the Maduro regime. He said that there could be no bystanders on this effort.
And the vice president also said that the U.S. is hoping for a peaceful transition to democracy. But anybody who saw the video over the weekend of those violent clashes at the border, blocking desperately needed aid from coming into the country, has got to wonder whether or not a peaceful transition is actually possible.
That's definitely the central question, and it's likely to become even more charged as time passes, because, as you mentioned, a large part of Pence's message yesterday was to the Venezuelan armed forces. He and others in the Trump administration have been urging soldiers to defect, to voice support for the Guaidó government, and to abandon all their loyalties to Maduro. But the problem is that Maduro has managed to retain the loyalty of much of the military's top brass, the generals and commanders. We have seen some high-level defections, but most of them have been from lower-ranking officials, including this weekend. And until Maduro loses the support of the military, he's likely going to dig in. And as we know, that's when quick escalation becomes particularly dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. Opposition leader Juan Guaido actually managed to get to Colombia despite a ban on him leaving Venezuela. How was he received? And, what is he expected to do next here?
Right. He was received warmly yesterday. He certainly had a lot of friends in the room surrounding him. The Colombian president welcomed him warmly, and he received, praise and applause virtually everywhere he went with this, crowd that was favorably disposed towards him. It was, of course, the first time that he and the vice president had met in person. The vice president later said he came away very impressed with Guaidó. In his private conversations, he said that Guaidó insisted on the importance of humanitarian aid finally making it into the country, but he also wanted these assurances that all options did indeed remain on the table. And Pence, assured Guaidó that they did. And as you said, there's this fact that Guaidó essentially snuck out of Venezuela in defiance of a travel ban issued by Maduro. And he's got to get back there somehow. Presumably, he wants to get back there soon. For the moment, it's unclear how and how publicly he intends to do that. So we'll have to wait and see.
So can we talk a little bit more about this incident involving the Univision team, Jorge Ramos? As I understand it, he was asking, very direct questions, the sort of questions that you're supposed to ask. And things went terribly wrong.
Yeah, this was a really brazen move on Maduro's part to detain this team of journalists just hours after the vice president was in the neighborhood, who was, of course, renewing calls for Maduro's ouster and reinforcing this international support, he said, for Guaidó. Of course, we know from Univision that Maduro grew angry about some of the questions they were asking, as you said, as journalists are supposed to do, and specifically about that video they showed about some Venezuelan youths picking through the trash to find something to eat. We know, starvation has set in Venezuela. But in true dictatorial fashion, Maduro had them detained and footage of their interview confiscated. And even though they were released relatively soon thereafter, it was enough to really propel this incident to the world stage and make a lot of people very, very nervous about both the fate of those journalists and about any next steps that Maduro may be contemplating.
So the journalists have since been deported. Can we expect any retaliation, though, from the White House?
Well, we certainly saw some sharp warnings from the State Department, specifically to Maduro, essentially saying, be careful what you do here because the world is watching and you're making a very big mistake if you don't immediately release this crew. It's not entirely clear that specific retaliation for this incident is forthcoming. I'm sure everybody was highly attuned to it. But it is just one more indication that this situation remains extremely tense, extremely volatile, and that there are likely more shoes to drop in the coming days and weeks.
I bet. Olivia, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne Marie.